What's up, YouTube? I just made a really awesome patch on the modular synthesizer, and I want to share it with you guys and kind of break it down and show you a couple of variations that we could possibly make with this particular sort of type of sound. So let's dive in and have a look. So I'm not sure if you guys can see like fully what's going on here, but in terms of the routing, what I like to do is go straight from my computer using my MIDI to CV converter straight into a pair of MULTS. That way I can kind of take the gate or the CV and split it amongst various modules. So say, for example, I want to trigger the clock on, various of the different modules. I can just split it out of the MULT. So, generally first thing I do when I open up the case is I plug my CV and my gate into the MULTs over there, and then that allows me to kind of just expand from there. I don't have to like unpatch something if I later realize, oh, I need to double up on my CVs or my gates or something like that, because generally speaking, that's what's going to happen. So generally, I mean, with MULTs, you get two types of MULTs. You get an active and you get a passive MULT. The active MULT makes sure that the voltage that's coming into the input is going to be exactly the same on the output. The passive MULT, obviously, because it has no sort of electronic components, it can't do that. So with gates, for example, like the clock input of the marbles doesn't need a full 5 volts. It just needs an on and an off trigger. So you can split the gates, various amount of times. Whereas the CV, the more you start to split it, if it were a passive MULT, the more sort of voltage drop you would have in your signal. So that's why I send my CV into a active MULT and my gate into a passive MULT. So here, the cool thing about this particular active MULT is it's kind of normaled. So what that means is I've got 3 outputs here that I can send to tune other modules. But if I don't plug this input in, these other 3 do just that as well. So I've got a total of like 6 tuning outputs. So if I send a MIDI key to that sort of CV, I can then tune 6 oscillators or 6 different elements within the patch using just that one little setup that I create in the beginning. So I've got this loop here, and I had a couple of patch ideas that I wanted to sort of show you guys. Here I've got the Waldorf NW-1 sending out a Karplus strong oscillator signal, and that sounds something like this. I like to kind of hear what the sounds might sound like once it's kind of been mixed while I'm creating it. And I like to use effects in the DAW because it means once I've recorded the signal in, I can go and change them at a later stage. So I'll probably end up getting some effects for the modular, but just for the time being, I find for my workflow, using internal effects is very helpful because you can, like I said, you can change them at a later stage. So what we're going to want to do with this sound is we're obviously going to want to create some sort of rhythm. We don't want it to kind of be endless unless we are going for that type of sound. But here, let's create like a sort of rhythmic sound we can use with that metallic sort of sound that we've got going already. Let's send the CV, like I was explaining, out of my MULT into the CV input to tune the oscillator. So now if I send it a MIDI note that's the same as, for example, the bass line in my track, it's going to be tuned to that note because I already tuned it beforehand. I didn't want to waste your guys' time. So because I want to filter the sound as well, we can use the internal VCA that's in the hex inverter Red Dragon. So let's route the NW-1 into the input of the Red Dragon, and then let's route the output into the input of the hot glue. This is basically a mixer with a built-in compressor, distortion, all sorts of cool things like that. So because we want this to obviously coincide with the tempo of the track that we're making, let's send that gate from that MULT, like I was explaining, into the clock input of marbles. Then we can use marbles to create a sequence of triggers, which we can use to attenuate the VCA. So let's send the T3 output into the trigger input of this ALM pip slope over here. And then let's send the output of this into the VCA input of the hex inverter Red Dragon. And then we're going to switch this out VCA off. So a really nice effect is to randomly modulate the decay of a VCA. And that creates a sort of like open closing effect of that like sort of sound that you were hearing. And I would think that the best way to do this right now is to use marbles, as this is a random CV output on the X section over here. It's clocked to the tempo already. So let's route one of these X outputs into the decay input. So because we've clocked our sort of rhythm using marbles, we can use this kind of bias to create like random sort of rhythmical patterns to create a kind of like sequence. So it's going to kind of sound a little bit more random until we have it playing over a sort of backtrack or a beat or something like that. So I'm going to play the kick and bass and percussions and stuff that I've been working on. Cool, that's awesome. So now obviously we don't want to sit tweaking that cutoff the whole time, and we want to maybe create some sort of like random variations that we can kind of like record some samples in, chop up and resample and stuff like that. And one of my favorite modules for creating never-ending random CV modulations is the weird Woggle Bug by Make Noise. So here's where the beauty of that mult, like I was explaining in the beginning, comes in, because we can just sort of add another output from here to clock this. And now we have the Woggle Bug running at the same tempo as our track is running. So now we can just send this random CV output into the cutoff input. And let's create some sequences. So let's make this rhythm slightly less random. Let's use the Euclidean rhythms that this vpme.de Euclidean circles has built in. Again, we can send another one of these melted clock outputs to the clock input of this guy. And then instead of sending this output to the VCA, let's send number 1 of that guy. So I'm not going to explain what Euclidean rhythms are, and I'm not going to go through all the functions of this module. We're just going to quickly use it to create some cool sounds to record in. So what if we wanted to distort this sound a little bit further before sending it into the filter and the VCA and stuff like that? The cool thing about the mutant hot glue and just sort of modular synths in general is we can sort of take a part out of this and use it kind of like pre our sort of filter section. So what we can do is we can actually send, instead of this input directly into here, let's send it into the input of this distortion, and then let's send the distortion output into the filter. Now we've got an extra little bit of distortion before the filter, so we can kind of add a little bit more grit to the sound if we need to. So say, for example, we want some more random modulations coming out of this woggle bug. And like I was explaining, we can just sort of use this extra sort of mult that's in this IntelliGel mult over here to do so. So let's double up on that guy. Let's plug the input over here. That then bypasses that sort of pitch tuning like I was explaining earlier. And then let's send this back into the cutoff. Let's maybe send this to somewhere else. Let's do input over here and the input over here. The coolest thing about this NW-1 is just so much sort of modulation capabilities built into the oscillator. And it's different stuff to what you usually see in synths. So let's create some sounds with that. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. Awesome, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.